somber, slightly echoing voice as if telling a story by a fireplace. Somewhere beyond the craggy cliffs of northern Europe, there once stood a lighthouse that never slept. Its brilliant beam, a solitary eye, sliced through the inkiest of nights, standing vigil over the restless sea. But some say it was watching over more than just the waves. Perhaps it was watching for something else entirely. Tonight, we unbolt the heavy doors of Durness Point, a place where the light itself seems to develop a hunger, and the cold, dark sea remembers every single soul it has ever claimed. You were listening to The Lighthouse That Never Sleeps, a classic Gothic horror tale from the forgotten windswept coastlines of 1930s Europe. So, I invite you to turn down your lights, turn up your fear, and step with me into the dark. If you enjoy tales that chill you to the bone, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens when the light goes out. Music begins, low, ominous, with the sound of a distant train whistle and howling wind. The train from Inverness hissed its final breath, surrendering to the bitter wind that scoured the northern coast of Scotland. The year was 1931. The last passenger stepped onto the desolate platform, and only one man remained: Edward Hargreaves, a marine surveyor sent to inspect the aging beacon at Durness Point. The station master, an old man with trembling hands, just gave a silent nod toward a narrow road that vanished into the fog. 3 miles north, he rasped. Follow the sound of the sea. You'll hear it before you see it. Edward adjusted his coat against the shrieking wind and began the long trudge. He had read of Durness Point before. The lighthouse had burned without ceasing since 1847, a beacon guiding ships from the treacherous reefs below. But sailors whispered rumors that the light never dimmed, never faltered, and that its keepers seldom lasted more than a year. As night gathered, the lighthouse loomed from the mist like a pillar of bone, its single lantern glowing with an almost unnatural intensity. Edward felt its light on him, like an unblinking eye that had been waiting. At the base of the cliffs stood the keeper's cottage. He knocked, and the door opened at once. "You must be Mr. Hargreaves," the man said. He was tall and narrow-shouldered, with a beard the color of iron filings. "Captain Alistair Rowan," Edward replied. Inside, the cottage was lit by oil lamps. A single clock ticked on the wall, but its hands didn't move. "It burns bright," Edward observed, looking at the lighthouse beam sweeping across the churning sea. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "It burns," he said slowly, "because it must. The light has never gone out. Not once, even when we tried." He told Edward of a storm in 22. The mechanism failed, the oil ran dry, but the light kept burning, even through the wooden boards they used to cover it. The wind moaned against the shutters, a sound that was almost human. Later, as Rowan handed Edward a lamp for his room, he said, "Keep it lit. The dark here isn't like elsewhere. It listens." Edward found the remark absurd. He dreamed of the sea that night, not as water, but as something vast and watchful. When he awoke, his lamp still burned, though the oil should have been spent hours ago. The next morning, he joined Rowan in the lantern room. The air grew colder with each step up the winding stairs. The great mechanism of brass and iron whirred steadily. The oil chamber was empty. The wick was dry. Yet the flame burned, a silent blue-white fire. "Impossible," Edward murmured. As he leaned closer, he felt a strange vibration from within the glass, like a heartbeat. In the reflection, his own face seemed wrong, older, his eyes darker. "You see it, then," Rowan said with something like pity. "Believe what you must. But remember, it sees you too." That evening, a thick fog rolled in. Through the walls, Edward heard a faint knocking. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 again. He opened the shutters. The night was still. In the distance, the lighthouse beam swept once, twice, and then hesitated before resuming its perfect rotation. Suddenly, a dragging sound came from beneath the floorboards, slow and deliberate, like wet cloth on stone. Edward froze. He followed the sound down the stairs. The front door was ajar, and there, on the damp earth, were bare human footprints, leading from the cottage toward the lighthouse, but only one set of prints, going out, not coming back. "Rowan," he called. No answer. He followed the prints to the lighthouse door. It was open. Halfway up the spiral stairs he heard a whisper, soft as breath, seeming to come from the stone walls themselves. Stay. Awake. The light must never sleep. In the lantern room, Rowan stood before the lens, bathed in its glow. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "It doesn't like strangers." "What is it?" Edward demanded. Rowan turned, and his eyes reflected the light, not with color, but with motion, as if the flame itself burned behind them. "The sea is never silent," Rowan whispered. "It dreams, and when men first built this tower, they trapped one of its dreams inside. That's what keeps the light alive." A deep pulse thrummed through the floor, as if the sea itself had taken a breath. The lens flared, blindingly bright. When Edward lowered his hand, Rowan was gone. Edward stumbled back to the cottage and bolted the door. From the cliffs came that faint sound again. 3 knocks, pause, 3 again. He turned to the window. Through the fog, the lighthouse burned like a single, unblinking eye, and somewhere inside that light, he thought he saw movement. He drew the curtains tight, but the glow pressed through the fabric, thin and cold. The lighthouse did not sleep, and before the week was out, neither would he. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the unknown. We'll see you in the next one. Dawn broke reluctantly over Durness Point, painting the sea a dull, leaden gray. I sat by the cottage window, staring at the lighthouse, trying to convince myself that last night was just a bad dream. But Rowan was gone. His bed was untouched. His coat and boots were still by the door, yet the lamp I'd found in the tower now burned quietly on the table, its flame steady, even though I never relit it. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe he went to the village. He'd be back by noon, surely. But when I stepped outside, there were no footprints on the path, only a thick carpet of sea mist and the hypnotic flash of the lighthouse beam. I felt myself drawn to it again. The fog was so dense it muffled every sound except for a faint hum coming from inside the tower. The door was still ajar. "Rowan!" I called out. Only my own echo answered, spiraling up the stone staircase. The climb felt longer this time. The walls were sweating salt, and the steps glistened with condensation. Halfway up, I noticed a small side door I'd missed before. It was bolted shut, and carved into the stone above it was a single word: "Below." I touched the bolt. It was old and cold, yet strangely warm, as if something was breathing on the other side. A shiver went down my spine, but I pushed on. The lantern room was just as I'd left it. The impossible flame, the dry wick, the great lens turning in its slow, spectral dance. But the air felt different, heavy, thick with static. And then I saw them. Faint, greasy handprints on the floor, as if someone had crawled around the base of the lens. "Rowan," I whispered, "where the devil are you?" As if in reply, a low, rumbling groan rose from the sea below. I returned to the cottage, my mind a mess. A pot of cold tea sat on the stove, and underneath it, a folded note. It was Rowan's handwriting. It said, "If you are reading this, then I am gone. The light does not permit long absence. There is a chamber beneath the tower. The old keepers called it the heart. Do not open it. Whatever happens, do not go below." Fear and duty wrestled inside me. I was an investigator. I had to know. By dusk, I was back at the tower, lantern in hand. The hum was louder now, a deep vibration I could feel in my bones. I found the door marked "Below." The bolt slid open with unnerving ease. A wave of warm, stale air, thick with the smell of salt and iron, washed over me. I stepped into a narrow passage sloping down into the rock. The walls were slick, glistening like the inside of some living creature. The deeper I went, the stronger the vibration became, pulsing in sync with my own heartbeat. Water dripped from the ceiling, leaving faint red stains on my palm. The passage opened into a circular stone chamber. In the center, a huge iron plate was bolted to the floor, covered in strange, shifting symbols. In a corner sat an old wooden chair, and on it, a tattered, leather-bound journal. The first page was marked, Log of Keeper Malcolm Rowan, 1873. An ancestor, maybe? His entries were terrifying. He wrote of the light burning without oil, of whispers in the pipes, and of opening the heart. One man fell in, he wrote, not into water, but into a darkness that swallowed light whole. The final page was torn. My hands trembled as I closed the book. Suddenly, the passage behind me seemed to narrow, the air growing thick as if the rock itself was constricting. My lamp flickered and died, plunging me into total darkness. And then I heard it. A whisper, a low, mournful, human melody winding through the stone, and within it, a voice I knew. Rowan's voice. "Stay awake. Edward." I fled, scrambling up the stairs and bursting out into the night. The fog was gone. The lighthouse beam burned brighter than ever, but it was no longer sweeping the sea. It was fixed, pointed directly at the cottage. I didn't sleep that night. The light pierced through the curtains, painting my room in a restless, pulsing gold. Around midnight, a knocking started, coming from beneath the floorboards. I found a hidden ring and pulled. A hatch lifted, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. From below, I heard faint, wet breathing, and then Rowan's broken voice. "Help me." I climbed down into a tunnel that led toward the cliffs. The air grew hot, and the roar of the sea became deafening. The tunnel opened into a vast, cathedral-like cavern. In the center was a pool of black, still water, and there, kneeling at its edge, was Rowan. His eyes glowed in my lamplight. "It's awake," he said. "The light, it's hungry." He pointed to the pool. Beneath the surface, something vast and golden was moving. "It sleeps beneath the sea," Rowan murmured. "They built the lighthouse to keep it dreaming. The flame feeds it, but the boundary is weakening. If the light goes out, it will rise." I backed away, horrified, as a whisper rose from the water, curling into my mind. "Stay awake. Stay with me." For a moment I saw faces in the water, their mouths moving silently. I ran, leaving Rowan's voice echoing behind me. "Don't let it sleep, Edward. Don't ever let it sleep." Back in the cottage, I looked at the old journal again. The ink from the torn page had bled through. I could just make out the final words. "The keeper must not sleep." I looked out the window. The lighthouse beam cut through the dawn, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it had found its new keeper. Thanks for joining me on this descent into darkness. If you enjoy tales of cosmic dread, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories from the shadows. Stay curious and stay safe. The wind came back on the third night. It howled across the cliffs like some living thing, clawing at the cottage stones and shaking the shutters until they rattled like teeth. I sat by the hearth, my lamp burning low, the journal of Keeper Malcolm Rowan open on my knees. I'd read the words a dozen times, but they swam before my eyes. I couldn't shake the sound, faint but persistent, rising and falling with the tide beyond the walls. A voice. No, not one voice. Many. "It's just the sea," I told myself. "The sea can sing if you listen long enough." But when I pressed my ear to the cold window pane, I heard syllables, broken, indistinct but unmistakably human. "Stay awake. Don't let it die." I jerked back as if I'd been struck. The flame in my lamp fluttered violently, though no wind touched it. The light quivered, and for one dreadful moment, The shadow it cast on the wall was not my own. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pool beneath the cliffs, the black water stirring that faint golden shimmer below. I kept hearing Rowan's voice from the journal. Don't let it sleep. I found myself staring at the lighthouse more and more, drawn by its steady beam. It no longer felt like a comfort. It felt like it was watching me, pulsing in time with my heart. By dawn, the journal lay forgotten, its final page torn. I stepped outside into the biting wind. The air tasted of iron and rain, and from somewhere below, deep within the labyrinth of rock and sea, came that same low hum, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. I followed it down the narrow path. Far below, the entrance to a cavern yawned black and soundless. I hesitated, but went in. The tunnel sloped downward, and my lantern seemed to dim as if the very air was consuming the light. I reached the cavern at last. The pool lay still as glass, reflecting my lamp. But the shimmer was wrong. It wasn't a reflection, it was pulsing from within, golden and slow. "Rowan," I called out softly. Only a distorted echo answered. As I leaned closer, a ripple disturbed the pool. The reflection twisted, and another face stared up at me. Not my own. It was Rowan's, pale and still, his eyes open, his mouth moving silently beneath the water. I staggered back, nearly dropping the lamp, but the voice that rose from the pool was not Rowan's. It was countless voices, layered, whispering as one. "He keeps it now. He feeds the light. You will too." The water stirred violently. The golden glow flared, and for an instant I saw them. Hundreds of shapes drifting just beneath the surface, pale faces with wide eyes. They turned toward me in perfect unison. I fled, scrambling up the tunnel, the whispers following, growing louder, faster, until they became a single cry inside my skull. "Stay awake! Stay awake!" When I burst into daylight, a storm had broken. Rain lashed the cliffs. Yet through the deluge, the lighthouse burned with an unnatural brightness. The beam was no longer sweeping. It stood fixed, shining directly into the storm's heart. Driven by instinct, I stumbled toward the tower. The door swung open at my touch. At the top, the lantern room glowed with blinding light. The flame had grown, a tunnel of brilliance with no end. Within it, shadows of men moved, climbing, falling, reaching out. And among them, one figure stood still. Rowan. He flickered like a ghost. His mouth moved. "Don't let it die." Then he was gone. I turned to run, but a hand caught my arm, cold, wet, and strong as iron. I saw nothing, but I felt it. A voice filled the room. It must not sleep. I tore free, stumbling down the stairs as the light chased me. I burst through the cottage door. The room was cold, silent, but on the table lay a fresh page, written in Rowan's same script. October 21st. A new keeper has been chosen. The light burns within him now. The ink was still wet. I turned, my heart hammering. The lamp by the bed flared, its flame stretching tall, burning with the same pale hue as the lighthouse. From the shadows by the door came a soft, familiar voice. "Mr. Hargreaves." It was Rowan, or what was left of him. His skin was gray, glistening with seawater. His eyes shone with a faint gold light. "It isn't finished," he said. "You woke it. Now it will not rest until the light burns through you." I backed away. "You're dead." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but the light never dies. It only changes its keeper." He reached out, his fingers leaving trails of damp light on the air. "Come," he whispered. "It's waiting." I ran. I ran into the storm, the rain like knives, the wind tearing at my coat. No matter how far I went, the beam followed me. I reached the cliffs and stared at the sea. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the water below. And there, rising from the depths, I saw it. A vast, coiled shape, glowing faintly, its heartbeat pulsing through stone and tide, and from it came thousands of voices, all whispering my name. The light struck me full in the chest, and I saw everything. The keepers before me, the faces in the water. I saw Rowan, and then myself, standing beside him, tending the flame. Then, darkness. I awoke on the cold stones at the base of the lighthouse. The storm had passed. I told myself it was a dream. But when I rose, I felt a vibration beneath my ribs, a pulse that was not my own. The whisper came again, so soft I could barely hear it. Stay awake. I touched my chest. A slow, steady, endless heartbeat answered. Far above in the lantern room, the flame burned brighter than ever, its core glowing the color of blood. The evening arrived in a strange, heavy silence. For days, the wind had howled without end, but now it was gone, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. I stood at the lighthouse window, watching the gray dusk bleed into a deep violet. Above me, the lantern began its nightly hum, its giant glass eye sweeping the water like a restless guard. I hadn't seen Thomas, the old keeper, for over a day. He'd vanished into the lower chambers, muttering about recalibrating the mechanism. I knew it was just an excuse. Ever since that night I heard my name whispered on the waves, he'd become withdrawn, almost scared. But tonight the air felt different, thicker. The very walls seemed to vibrate with a tense energy. Drawn by a rhythmic groaning from the machinery above, I started up the spiral stairs. Each step echoed in the iron belly of the tower. With every turn, the light grew brighter. Too bright. It was fueled by something more than just oil and flame. When I reached the top, the massive Fresnel lens was turning smoothly, but the glow it cast was unnatural, a cold, pale, blue radiance that pulsed in time with my own frantic heartbeat. I leaned against the railing, dizzy, and peered through the glass. Below, the sea glimmered under a thin veil of moonlight. And then I saw it. Each time the beam passed over the waves, it revealed shapes that vanished when the light moved on. At first I thought it was just driftwood, but then I saw faces, dozens of them, floating just beneath the surface. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. They turned upwards, mouths open in a silent scream, their eyes reflecting the lantern's unholy glow. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white. The pulse of the light behind me felt like a slow, patient heartbeat that wasn't my own. I turned, and for a split second, I swear I saw a silhouette within the lens itself, a tall figure watching me. But when I looked again, there was nothing, just the spinning light and the endless hum. I fled down the stairs. At the bottom, Thomas was hunched over a logbook, his eyes wild. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he whispered. "The watchers, they look back." He sighed, a sound heavy with confession. "This lighthouse was never meant to guide ships," he said, his voice cracking. "It was meant to keep them out." He opened the logbook to a page yellowed by a century of salt and time. Faded entries told a horrifying story. "The light grows restless. 3 drowned this week. I hear them in the fog. The sea hungers. It must be fed." Thomas's finger trembled on the page. "The light doesn't just shine," he rasped. "It watches, it listens, and when it tires of watching, it calls to the deep. If that light ever goes out, it won't be the dark that kills us, but what comes for it." My throat was dust. "The faces?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Those who answered the call before you. The sea never forgets a voice." Outside, a low thunder rumbled. The pale blue light from above flickered across the floorboards like ghostly veins. I had to know. Ignoring Thomas's desperate pleas, I raced back up the stairs. The hum was louder now, no longer mechanical, but a deep, resonant chant, like a choir singing from the bottom of the ocean. Back in the lantern room, the blue radiance pressed against my skin like cold hands. The faces in the water were clearer, their mouths forming my name, over and over. And then, between the flashes of light, something surfaced. A tall figure, draped in seaweed and foam, stood upon the water. Its eyes burned with the same blue fire as the lantern. It lifted an arm and pointed directly at the tower. The light froze, its beam aimed squarely back at us. Thomas screamed from below, "Turn it away! You'll wake them!" But I was paralyzed. The light was alive, and in its shimmering heart I saw hundreds of faces, not reflections, but trapped souls, pressing against the inside of the glass. The hum became a wail. As the glass trembled, I reached out instinctively. The moment my fingers brushed the lens, everything went silent. For one impossible heartbeat, the world stopped. Then a whisper right beside my ear. "We see you now." The light exploded. When the brilliance faded, I was alone in total darkness. The lantern had gone out. The great eye of the lighthouse was blind for the first time in 100 years. And from below, I heard the roar of the sea, not from outside, but from inside the tower itself. And somewhere, deep beneath the floorboards, something began to climb. Thank you so much for listening to this tale. If you enjoy stories that explore the darkness, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. We have new horrors waiting for you every week. Stay safe out there. The night after the light went out, the storm hit. But this wasn't just any storm. It didn't roll in with a distant rumble. No, it struck all at once, like a god waking up on the wrong side of eternity. The sea rose up and slammed against the rocks with such fury that the entire lighthouse groaned. I was ripped from sleep by the sound of shattering glass. The wind was screaming through the keeper's quarters, snatching papers and flinging them around like a flock of terrified birds. My head was still spinning, that strange whisper of my name echoing in my thoughts. I stumbled out of my cot. The lantern room above? It was pure black. I could hear Thomas, the old keeper, shouting over the storm, his voice almost completely swallowed by the roar. I wrestled the heavy door open and fought my way down the hall. The air was thick with the smell of salt water and burning oil. Water was already seeping in, swirling cold around my ankles. Thomas stood near the engine room, his face pale and glistening with sea spray. "It's inside," he cried, his voice trembling. "The sea's inside the walls." I followed his panicked gaze and saw it myself. The very stones of the lighthouse were weeping salt water. Glistening streams ran down every surface, glowing with a faint, ghostly light. The pipes rattled, and from deep below, a hollow pounding started, like giant fists hammering on the foundations. Then the whispering began again. It rose above the howling wind, a chorus of voices, neither male nor female, just a terrible, collective hunger. "Keeper, come back. The light must feed." I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The voices vibrated right through my skull. I turned to Thomas, yelling, "What are they saying?" He just stared into the empty air, listening to something I couldn't hear. "They want it back," he muttered. "The light calls to them. It always has." A sudden crash shook the tower, throwing us off balance. A door upstairs slammed open with bone-jarring force. "If the light's out, why are they still here?" I shouted. Thomas looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mix of tears and horror. "Because you touched it," he said. "Now it remembers you." Lightning flashed, and for a split second I saw them, shadows moving along the walls, long, twisting figures made of water. They passed through the solid stone like mist, their forms collapsing and reforming, their faces dissolving into sea foam. Thomas collapsed to his knees. "It's too late," he gasped. "The storm won't end until it takes what was promised." "Promised what?" I knelt beside him. His voice dropped to a ragged whisper. "Every keeper, every decade. One must join them in the light. That's the bargain. That's how the tower stands." Before I could even process that, thunder ripped through the sky, and one of the oil lamps fell, spilling fire across the floor. As I smothered the flames, the water surged higher, sloshing around my knees. A deep, rhythmic knocking started from beneath us, too deliberate to be the storm. "To the lantern room," Thomas said, struggling to his feet. If we can rekindle it, maybe we can hold them off. We climbed the slick, spiral stairs, the tower swaying like a ship in a gale. The lantern room was a wreck. The great lens was cracked and the apparatus had stopped turning. But a dim, unsteady blue glow pulsed from within, like a dying star. "It's still alive," I whispered. "Not alive," Thomas said, his voice grim. "Hungry." He pulled a flare gun from a chest. "If the storm doesn't stop, the tower will collapse. I'll signal for help." I was drawn to the lens. In the fractured glass, I saw reflections. A woman in a drowned sailor's coat, a child with hollow eyes, and in the center, my own face, submerged and distorted. I reached out. "Don't!" Thomas yelled, but it was too late. My fingers brushed the glass and the room exploded with cold light. The voices became a unified scream. Through the blinding halo, I saw the truth. The lighthouse wasn't built on rock. It was anchored into a vast, living pit lined with bones. And in that abyss, a colossal shape stirred, its eyes glowing with the same blue light, looking straight into my soul. I screamed and fell back. The vision vanished. "You saw it, didn't you?" Thomas asked. "What is it?" I could barely speak. "The first keeper," he said softly. "The one who made the pact." Just then, a wave shattered the window. Water poured in, and through the opening came a sound between a scream and a song. The watery faces swirled around us. A woman's voice whispered in my ear, "Join us. The storm will never end until you do." Thomas fired the flare, but the red light was instantly swallowed by the storm. The tower began to lean, the cliffs outside collapsing into the sea. "Thomas!" I shouted, but he was already at the lens, his hands pressed against the light. He looked back, his face strangely calm. "Someone must keep it burning." "Don't!" I screamed. He gave me a weary, broken smile. "Forgive me." And he stepped into the light. His silhouette burned bright for a second, then he was gone, absorbed into the brilliance. The light flared, stronger than ever, sweeping across the sea. And just like that, the storm began to quiet. I fell to my knees, staring at the lens. Faintly, I could see Thomas's face inside, watching. The lighthouse was awake again, and this time, it wouldn't be sleeping. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling tale. If you love stories that explore the darkness, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments what you think happened next. Stay safe, and see you in the next video. The storm was over, but the quiet that came after was 100 times worse. It wasn't peace, it was the suffocating silence of a graveyard. The sea, now smooth as a mirror, reflected the cold, blue fire of the lighthouse. The beam turned just like before, but slower now, thoughtful. It was as if the tower itself had woken up. I stood by the window, my clothes still damp, my skin stinging with salt. Every little sound, every creak of the old wood made my heart jump. I hadn't slept. I was too afraid of the whispers that lingered just at the edge of my hearing. Thomas, the old keeper, was gone. Or no, he hadn't just gone. He'd become the light. When I looked up at the lantern, sometimes I could swear I saw his silhouette drifting inside the lens, a ghost in the machine. It made me sick, but I couldn't look away. By morning, the fog had become a solid gray wall, swallowing the world. It felt like being buried alive. I tried to keep busy, fixing a chair, counting supplies, anything to fight the silence that seemed to be laughing at me. But every time the beam swept past the window, its light felt like the gaze of some enormous, patient monster. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go up. The spiral staircase felt endless, each step heavier than the last. The iron rail was slick with a cold sweat. When I reached the lantern room, the air was freezing. Frost was actually blooming on the glass even though it wasn't winter. The light turned, but it was darker now, like it was swallowing the world instead of illuminating it. And then I heard it. A voice whispering from inside the lens. "Jonathan." It was Thomas's voice. I froze. "Thomas?" I whispered back. The voice came again, echoing from deep within the machinery. "You must go down." "Down where?" I asked. "To the base," it said. "Below the foundation. Below the stone. It waits there." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "You're not real." But the lantern's pulse quickened, the whole room vibrating as if something deep in the earth had stirred. Thomas's face appeared in the glow, his eyes hollow and burning with that same blue fire. "Go," he urged, his lips not moving. "You must descend before it does." I fled, stumbling down the stairs as the light chased me, pouring through the cracks in the stone like liquid fire. At the bottom of the tower, the floor was wet. Water was pooling around a small rusted drain in the center. As the light pulsed from above, the water rippled, as if something was pushing up from below. The air stank of iron and decay. When I touched the grate, it was warm. I could hear a faint rhythmic beating from the other side. A heartbeat. With a shriek of rusted metal, I tore the grate loose. A dark shaft opened up beneath me, a slick, glistening throat leading down into the earth. Lighting an old lantern, I began to climb down. The air grew thick and warm, smelling of salt and something ancient and rotten. I landed in a narrow tunnel carved from the rock itself. The walls pulsed with that same blue glow, seeping through cracks like glowing veins. The tunnel opened into a cavern flooded with seawater, and in the center stood a massive, ancient metal structure, humming with energy. It looked like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. Inside it, a great cylinder pulsed with liquid light, feeding the beam far above. Then I saw them. Faces swirling inside the cylinder. Dozens of them, pale and distorted, their eyes wide and empty. They moved with the rhythm of the light, their mouths opening and closing in a silent, horrifying hymn. I turned to run, but the tunnel had changed. The walls were no longer stone, but living, glistening flesh. The floor rose and fell like it was breathing. I ran, scrambling as spectral hands reached out from the walls. The water rose to my knees, the blue light blinding me. I finally reached the ladder and scrambled up, a deep voice echoing from the darkness below me. "You woke us," it boomed. "The light must feed." I burst back into the keeper's room, gasping. The blue light spilled from the hole in the floor like a living mist, curling around my ankles. The tower shuddered, the lantern above spinning like a mad thing. I grabbed the keeper's logbook. Page after page, the same 5 words, written by generations of keepers. The light must feed. I looked up, trembling. Not again. I grabbed a can of oil and hurled it down the shaft. I struck a match, my hand shaking, and dropped it. The explosion was deafening. White heat surged upwards, throwing me against the wall. Then silence. I opened my eyes. The fire was gone. The light in the tower was out. But from deep below, I could still hear it. A slow, steady heartbeat. Patient. Eternal. The tower wasn't dead. It was just waiting. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the edge of reality. The dawn never came. Though the clock struck 7, the world beyond the lighthouse window remained smothered in a darkness that refused to lift. The sea, once so restless, now lay unnaturally still, its surface like polished stone. I stood at the base of the spiral stairs, the lantern in my hand trembling. The silence was so deep, so absolute, that the sound of my own breath felt like a trespass. I hadn't seen Thomas since last night, not since the storm came alive and the very walls of this tower howled like beasts in torment. The memory of it still burns in my mind, the great light shattering, the screams swallowed by the roar of the sea, and that final, gut-wrenching moment when the lantern's flame died, plunging everything into an endless, breathing dark. Now the tower feels hollow, like the rib cage of some colossal creature long dead. Every step I take sends faint echoes spiraling up into the unseen dome above. The air is cold, heavy with salt and something else, something metallic, like blood. I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "Thomas?" No answer. Only the slow, rhythmic drip of water from somewhere deep below. I had to know. I began to climb. The stairs felt longer than before, winding endlessly upward through the suffocating blackness. My lantern cast narrow slivers of gold across the stone walls, revealing strange, glistening streaks. Seaweed, perhaps, or something far more sinister. At one point I thought I saw the outline of a hand smeared along the stone, its fingers dragging upward toward the lantern room. When I finally reached the top, I stopped dead. The door to the lantern room was ajar, and from within, a faint blue shimmer pulsed like the slow, rhythmic beating of a monstrous heart. I pushed it open. The great Fresnel lens, though shattered, glowed from within. Shards of glass littered the floor, glittering like ice, and in the center, where the mechanism once turned in perfect harmony, stood Thomas. His back was to me, his arms outstretched toward the fractured core of the light. "Thomas," I whispered again. The old keeper didn't move. His clothes were soaked, clinging to him as if he'd just climbed out of the sea itself. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't his own. It was layered, as if dozens were speaking through him at once. "They have come to rest," he said. "The light has slept. Now the sea may dream again." I stumbled forward, the air around me vibrating with a low, mournful hum. "What are you talking about? You said the light must never go out." Thomas turned. His eyes were as pale as moonlight, his skin drawn tight across his skull. "It watched too long," he rasped. "It remembered too much. You saw them, didn't you, Jonathan? The ones below. They don't forgive. They don't forget. Every keeper who served this light became its prisoner. We burned for it, we fed it, we let it see. But what happens when an eye sees forever?" His voice cracked, and for a fleeting moment the man I knew returned. "It wanted to rest," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. "So, I let it sleep." The blue glow brightened, swelling to fill the chamber. The air became electric. I shielded my eyes as the shards of glass on the floor began to vibrate, lifting slowly into the air. They spun in a slow circle, orbiting the broken core like stars around a dying sun. "Thomas, you have to stop this," I screamed. He smiled, and it was a terrible, serene smile. "I can't. It's dreaming now. It dreams of the deep." With a sudden shriek, the glass fragments shot outward, embedding themselves in the walls. The light surged, flooding the room with a blinding radiance. And through the haze, I saw the reflection of the sea stretching to infinity, not outside the windows, but within the very air around us. Waves crashed on invisible shores. Shapes moved beneath the surface, massive, graceful, ancient. Then came the whisper, the same one that had haunted me since the storm. "We see you now." The floor trembled. Cracks split across the stone, and cold water bubbled up, flooding the chamber. Thomas turned toward the glow, his arms still raised. "They're coming home," he said softly, just before the water surged upward, swallowing him whole. I screamed his name, but my voice was lost in the roar as the sea burst through the windows in a torrent of black water, sweeping me off my feet. I tumbled down the spiral stairs, my lantern extinguished until I finally came to rest, waist-deep in icy water at the tower's base. The lighthouse groaned, its foundations shuddering. Through the broken doorway, I could see the ocean was now level with the land, flooding everything. The air filled with hundreds of whispers, all calling my name. I turned, and there they were, pale, luminous faces emerging from the water. They floated in the blackness, surrounding me in a slow, circling dance. As they drew near, I realized they weren't reaching for me, but past me. I looked. Rising from the dark water was the lantern itself, no longer a machine, but immense and alive, its broken lens beating like a heart of blue fire. The light that watched had become the thing that dreamed. It pulsed once. The faces vanished. The walls cracked open. The sea roared, devouring the last breath of air. And in that final instant, just before everything dissolved into darkness, I saw what lay beneath the waves. It was not the sea. It was an eye, wide, ancient, and awake. Then the world went black.